Hi, and welcome back to Research Box, and welcome back to my esteemed colleague, Professor Annette Fillery Travis. And we've been recording these podcasts for ages, haven't we? And suddenly thought, let's do our first video. And actually, it's quite an interesting subject we're going to talk about, because we're going to talk about the different types of research bases, in a sense, what's valuable, what's not, views of different types of research. So it struck us as a good intro for someone that's not met the podcast before, and a continuation of some themes for those who are regular listeners. So, anyway, how are you, Annette? Is life treating you well?
Very well, thank you. Very well indeed. Lots happening in the research front, lots of interesting papers out there, and generally lots to do. So I'm sitting in the sun reading a lot, which is always a lovely thing to do.
Very good. What's been giving you pause for thought this week?
Now, this is an interesting one. And it really did give me pause for thought because I'm a member of a professional body, and I always recommend that to anybody who's got a practice. Get involved with others, find out what's actually happening. And this professional body has gone undergo a real churn in terms of its perspective around research. And it did all of this work, and it's an emerging professional field. I won't say which field it is, but it's an emerging professional field. So hasn't got the Royal Charter yet, but is very much a group of people who would identify themselves as working in organizations in that field. And they've suddenly decided that practitioner research is really not up to much, and that they really need to go back to good, solid academic research.
Oh, right. Pure
And I,
research almost.
sorry?
Like pure research.
Yeah. But no, because actually you can have academic, but we will discuss that in a
Oh, okay.
minute. So yeah, but I love your interjection there because it does identify perhaps the issues that are at play
Hmm.
here. Is practitioner research second best, or is it less than, etc.? And it really got me thinking because one of the things I really love is practice theory.
Hmm.
And very few people actually work with it, but it is the foundation of what most of us do in our professional field. We have a practice
Yeah.
and we teach and learn within that practice, and we develop expertise within that practice. Now, if I actually said to anybody, okay, so I'm just going to pull this out of the thin air. You're a management consultant, okay? So you do everything by the management consultant book, don't you? You do it A, B, C as you were taught.
Yeah, we don't, but yeah, I know what you mean.
It, but nobody does.
Nobody
That's
does.
the
Yeah.
point.
It's a bit like learning to drive, isn't it? Management consultancy. You pass the test and then you learn to drive.
Yes, exactly. It's a classic case. I had a lovely vet once who said, you can always tell a novice vet who's just come out from the classic because they will do a diagnostic wheel. They'll go through and they'll do all the rest. They'll view, they'll do the tests, they'll work out what's happening.
Yeah.
If I've been a vet for 30 years and when a dog comes into my office, I'll go, he's got this. It's the joy of real expertise and real practice because it's gone beyond simple rule following.
Yes.
And
It's gone
people,
from knowledge to wisdom, isn't it? Isn't that the old
oh,
expression?
exactly, the old wisdom is what is it? The application of knowledge with experience.
Yeah.
That's it. That's basically you go from knowledge to wisdom. And I've
Yeah.
always loved that. So it's a really interesting. But if you actually look at the wheel in the practice theory of what contributes to that vet standing there going as the two paws in the door and she goes, that's what's wrong with the vet dog, is it's actually to do with experience, rules, regulations from the professional field, her pattern recognition from 200
Yes.
dogs coming in on that case.
Yeah.
Also, the what's experience and best practice in her professional field and what she should do about it, as well as rules, regulations, culture. Would somebody want to do anything about that dog in that culture, etc.? All of those things, social norms, etc., as well as fundamental research.
And that's the key.
As well as. And I think Aristotle put this very well with practice wisdom. Basically, his concept of practice wisdom. Now, what I really worry about in this thing, and this is what pulls me, is to lose all of that wisdom and the sharing of that wisdom because of an over-reliance on fundamental research. And I think that's the way I'd like to put it. Instead of saying, oh, us as little practitioners, we're going to use this great piece, golden knowledge, and we'll apply it, and that will be out. No, we have our own research that is not tainted, but the word came to me because often people with that wisdom that allows us to choose it appropriately, to boundary that research so that we don't go off and decide to do research on students when actually everybody's interested in research on practitioners themselves, but students are easier to get, so we'll do that. It's boundary it, contextualize it, etc. So it becomes much more effective and much more applied, but it can still have, and I think this is what we've been doing in Research Box, has exactly the same opportunity for rigor.
Don't, I should say, rather than all the other bits of the English language I got mangled there. Don't many of the transformative leaps in practice or academic knowledge or know-how come from a combination of those two worlds or from the practitioner world? I'm thinking particularly in things like biology. You have to have both things. And in the social sciences, you get this paradigm shift, don't you? The trouble with the practitioner research sometimes is that you don't get a chance to stand back and you have narrow sample sizes. But even those narrow sample sizes are much wider than potentially academic sample sizes because academics can't get often into that practitioner base. So is it about balance or is it because one's not better than the other? They're just different, aren't they?
Exactly the point. And they actually come to the fore at different stages of the evolution of a practice. So if you're just starting off, and I'm just going to take an example of, because I know it, which is coaching, only came out really seriously as as part of a development portfolio for our senior leaders, etc., about 25 years ago, something like that, 30 years ago. If you look at the evolution of its literature, you see this beautiful evolution of people are putting some little case studies in the literature saying, you never guess, but when you use these sort of approaches, it seems to do something good. And then other people came on and said, all right, yes. And then they started talking about coaching cultures and how you put those into organizations, etc. And bit by bit, the type of research changed in response to the information that had already been achieved. So once you've got the case study, something of the variables that are around. So perhaps you can do a bigger pseudo experimental study, taking into account some of those factors because they're useful. And so that's how it evolves. And you can see this beautifully in the coaching literature. And you finally get to the stage where you're doing some significantly large scale studies. And those are undertaken quite interestingly by probably a mix of academics and practitioners. One is the fact that practitioners, you need to actually get into an organization to do a large scale study. You've got practitioners who've got the students to churn the data and everything that you need, etc., etc. So often is the case, and in that case, we had Mengensen and Clutterbuck as the two real fathers of coaching, and I'm very happy to say that. Clutterbuck was at university, Mengensen was at university, and Clutterbuck had his consultancy. And together they produced a wonderful perspective on driving knowledge of coaching together. I think that's a really nice example of where you get the best of both worlds.
Yes.
In that sense. So it is an evolution. So saying they do need to be hand in hand. And the classic one is team coaching. right? Which again came in about 15 years ago. I was one of the first couple of students working on it. And there was very little out there. It came from the practitioner field. And I was asked to coach the whole team. How do I do that? Because of course the practitioners are saying, we can't do it individually. I've got a team problem here. Can you do something with it? And the evolution of that procedure and protocols for use in team is still ongoing. And it's great and it's lovely, but it was driven from what practice needed.
Yeah.
Nobody in the academics said, let's investigate team coaching. It was a case
And it's also the case that practitioner-based coaching follows the rules and standards, the ethics, the structures, the challenges from a sort of more pure, I'll use that word probably incorrectly, but a more pure university thing, doesn't it? Because you are working to the same standards, you're following the same guidelines and processes, working at that level of thinking. You have Vivas, you have all of the same academic challenges. So, so what's the fundamental problem?
I'd love to know. I really would. Because I think one of the things is whenever I'm doing practitioner-based doctorates, I always say you have to hit all the same standards as for a PhD, absolutely. But in addition, you have to have impact.
Yes.
And that's the only decider. Often as much, you cannot tell the difference between one and the other. And it's a lovely thing when a student will be being examined by an academic and the academic will say, I really would like to work with you going forward. And I'm very happy as a supervisor saying that, because that is not my field. I'm supervising the student, not the subject. So I will be going, oh yeah, excellent. And they'll have great fun together because they'll want to work together. So I don't see where that actually comes from, that sense of less than, apart from ignorance from the academic side about how really knowledge is produced within a real context.
Is it ignorance or prejudice? You might argue those two things are the same, but I
I
suppose if
think
you've been in academia all your life and you have that is ignorance, isn't it? But then that begat the whole problem if you're so unaware of the other side of the equation, the practitioner use of things, and especially in certain fields, research doesn't happen for the sake of it. Theoretical physics, fair enough, but most people in the social sciences aren't doing theoretical work, aren't they? They're actually doing applied work. And I can see an obvious problem, and I do see this on a regular basis. I work with a community which is very hard to reach, and researchers come to us from universities and say, hey, can we talk to your people? I managed to get a sample size of something like 8 people for an academic research piece of academic paper and in a university. And I'll say, when I'm talking to 200 of those people every single week, what do you want to know? Because that's the practitioner side. We have access to HR
exactly.
networks. If you're doing HR research, it just strikes me as quite peculiar. Is it a form of, is it a snobbery maybe rather than prejudice?
It's an interesting one, because I remember talking to an academic who was also had a practice of their own. And I said, oh, practitioner research is really good. And he said, oh, yes, I'd love to work with practitioner research. It'd be so good for them to collect my data for me.
Yeah, that's
Like,
what they are.
really?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, no,
There it
no.
is. And that is snobbery, isn't it?
Yeah, and that really is. And they had no idea that they were doing it. I just looked at it, okay, I think we need to have another conversation.
Yeah.
I think there's also a case, and I would say this about my fellow academics, because I've been both sides. I'm a classic pracademic, although I really hate that term. I think scholar practitioner is so much better. That's just me being, is that we are brought up with this hierarchy of research rigor we discussed in a previous, which rather is a best, I suppose, rather is the sort of pristine version of research, because we also have said no research survives contact with participants.
Yeah.
You have to do a lot of, it is dirty around the edges, etc. But I think people are brought up with the view that it has to be in this particular structure and controlled to the nth degree, otherwise they won't get it published.
The other thing, from my perspective, I'm sitting here and not really knowing the incidents so much. I'm thinking, is it financial? Because with many things in the world today, people get off their academic high horses and look at the money, don't they? But I can't see the logic in that because practitioner research, like postdoctoral level, is generating a huge revenue line into universities. Is it, I don't know, is there a sort of theoretical standpoint between different parts of European research and the
Oh,
UK and the
yeah.
US perhaps? Is that partly a part of it?
I think there is a real case of that. The US, which is funny because the first professional doctorate actually came out of the Boston University, which I always forget the name of. What it did, I think Yale? Yes.
Oh, is it Harvard?
Harvard, that's it. I always
Yeah.
forget the wrong way round. Why? I have clearly got some sort of block here. Harvard. The first professional doctorate came out of Harvard in 1900s, and it was an education doctorate.
Oh,
And whenever I say that to everybody, I say, and they go, "Oh, but isn't professional doctorates new?" And you go, "No." And there's nothing precious about a doctorate. It can be whatever it wants to be. The universities, the knowledge production within the American environment has been very hierarchical for a reason that does chase the money, I'm afraid, I have to say. And it makes sense because there's so little, the whole, I'm trying to make, in fact, I'm sure I'm doing them wrong, but the case is that in a very capitalist environment, then trying to get anywhere requires that you get grants, etc., that really have criteria which are safe.
yeah.
And I think that's the problem for that. It hasn't got a huge, I think it's got, actually, no, I'm just correcting myself. I think it's got a huge practitioner research cohorts in things like nursing
Yeah,
and
makes
that
sense.
sort of environment where it's very difficult to get grants, etc. So I think it's a little bit more difficult than in the UK. But then if you go down to Southern European, you have much more hierarchical knowledge production modes in universities, the whole way that universities are set up, etc. And I would suggest there's a little bit more of a closed shop when it comes to that. So again, you've got that split across places. So you have a dependence on badges, that you have to have the badge and all the rest of it. So in terms of doctoral piece, so it is an interesting schism, and I think which it speaks to both the construction of the university system in the country engaged in it, the openness of the professional bodies around the issue. I don't see any issue. One of my professional bodies, and not the first one I was talking about, is the Royal Society of Chemistry. And it has no differentiation. There is no differentiation because they do conferences, and a chemist who's working in quality control in a food factory can put in the paper. And if any conference, and if anything, they'll probably be fated because everybody will want to know how it really works.
Yeah.
They'll
Well, I'm
be
thinking about university and large company associations where you could go and study various very esoteric forms of engineering, and you could go be an apprentice in an organization, you get a degree, and then you can go on and study a master's. And these are all exactly as you say, they're applying that research, and they're also going to add to the body of literature because they're working with it within a university framework. Even if the working institution itself is doing the knowledge transfer and the structure, it's still being supervised and audited and assessed by a university. So I wonder if it's the subjects which are the issue, because when you say nursing, maybe certain places think nursing isn't a proper academic subject, it's a job. I wonder if that's the snobbery.
Yeah, it's only just recently we've had professors of nursing for
Exactly.
15 years, 16 years, something like that. And that's not too long in the academic world. I was just thinking, I was just coming back. Yeah, when I was supervising doctorates in food, I had a great co-supervisor who was head of the food sector in Unilever.
Yeah, you would.
And it was just fabulous. The access to stuff that he had in terms of kit and everything was far beyond what I could do. So it was absolutely brilliant. Lovely. Mike Gidley. Hello, Mike. And he's still publishing it. I still have a little things coming up. But so I think you're right. It's subject based, and in particular, perhaps in the disciplines that haven't been around that long.
Right. And are you saying this is something to be aware of from the professional bodies, or this is a pressure coming from universities? Is it a reverse snobbery that professional bodies are saying we're not good enough just if we have practitioner research? Is it like an inferiority complex?
I think it is, because the Royal Society of Chemistry wouldn't even, they'd look at you blankly and say, yeah, there isn't so I suspect that some of the issues it's this lack of, I suppose that you might call it perhaps a lack of confidence in the professional bodies which are new and in professional fields, emerging professional fields, where we all know that we've read all the books that says to be a professional, you have to have a defined body of knowledge.
Yes.
So everyone gets very twitchy about what that defined body of knowledge is.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that I find quite interesting, because again, growing up in a more established, being a baby scientist as a chemist, nobody worried about the validity of the research that was coming into the body of knowledge, because they were using peer review. The conferences were a lovely opportunity to explore what you were doing, etc., and to get the feedback from peers. So they just used all of the usual processes. And so nobody ever said, is that real? It would have been unheard of, because you've got all these things established. In the new professional bodies, professional fields, and their associated professional bodies, I think there is this lack of confidence in what actually constitutes a proper, and we were talking, you introduced peer at the beginning, what constitutes really open, accessible peer review, which is positive. When I was a chemist, I very, very rarely had someone say, no, this is awful. When I put it, they were like, well, some good ideas here, perhaps you may want to consider. And I've actually been met by a reviewer who was so interested in what I was doing, but thought I'd taken a wrong view. He actually met me for coffee to explain what he thought. And it was a lovely conversation. I think they need to have more confidence in both their practitioners themselves and their own peer standards.
And can I be scurrilous for a minute?
Oh, do.
If you're sitting in a professional body not knowing much about academia, let's just call it that for a minute, people get very hidebound about, bent out of shape about various grades of university and which universities' views are you going to say Harvard, because I've heard of them, they're really fantastic, or you're going to say the University of Essex, and that doesn't sound very prestigious at all. So you get into this sort of pure snob value, don't you, of universities and where centres of excellence sit and where bodies of knowledge congregate and such. So it just seems quite bizarre that when we're talking about learning, that we chop off an aspect of learning which is so important. Just goes against the whole idea, doesn't it?
Exactly, because the whole point is that all universities sign into an external examining system.
Yeah.
At the most fundamental level. So I'm going to Trinity College Dublin to examine their EdD. What it means is I'm the expert in the field, so I'm going to tootle off. They have a lovely couple of days, look at the stuff that the students are producing, discuss with the faculty how they're thinking of evolving their piece, make some suggestions, clap everybody on the back and say, yay, good job. Or can you just have a little bit of attention on that one? And then, and we all do that. So there is a standard throughout. Yeah. And to say that some universities are better than others is only the case of that perhaps you might have access to better minds in the sense of they're right at their field.
Or
Be a
funds.
positive, that can be positive or a negative.
Mm.
I've always suggested that a good supervisor for you for any professional doctorate is to have someone who's in the mid-range, who's interested in you as a student, not just you getting a paper for them. Not that I'm making any comments about fellow supervisors, but there can be that little edge to it. And you want somebody who's available, not somebody who's jetting around the world doing lots of conferences.
Yeah.
So it is a real case of balance there.
So what's our message to this professional body? Mine is get a grip. But what's yours? Because I'm sure yours is going to be a less more polite.
No, actually, I was really, because I could see the real effort that lots of people had put in to build something that was going to build a body of knowledge when there isn't the money available to do the big studies. And the vision for that, I was really 100% behind, and I was going to go for it. No, I think it is a case of get a grip and actually learn what it means to be a professional.
Mm.
And that is at the core of it. A professional is someone who is knowledge producing in themselves. They're an epistemic practitioner. They've gone beyond rule following. You don't want a whole series of people just writing out of the book, I've done this now. It has to be, and it's selling the client short hugely.
Yeah. Well, I was doing some supervision of a student quite recently for a PhD, and what the university were asking and telling them was just astonishing, including on an internal PhD having yearly exams. And I know. And then it was being asked to write the PhD against the exam criteria. And I thought maybe this is where it's going, because that just seemed to be far from that sort of freewheeling idea that you've talked about, that, you know, you have a passion and you go and research it and you get involved in that thing. So maybe they want control again. Who knows?
I think the point is it becomes instrumentalized when people are under threat. And I think the university system, as we said last time, are completely under threat.
Yeah.
So the view is, right, we'll knuckle down, we'll do it by the rule book, and nobody can say our standards aren't there. I had a student who last year, and I almost said, please stop this Viva.
Really?
And I've never said it before in my life. And because the external said, there are certain criteria for doctoral education. These are the learning outcomes. Please, can you just tell me how you've achieved each of those learning outcomes? And I went, no, you don't understand what a doctorate is. You don't understand the history or the evolution of a doctorate. It's only recently we've had level indicators, and those are purely to allow us to have, for me to do the work of assessing whether the faculty are doing the right thing.
Yes.
It is not for the student to measure their transformational learning against 6 criteria which were developed by a committee on such and such. You know,
that strikes me as going back to funding objectives, isn't it? They ask for those things, therefore the university asks the students for those things. It's a form of shortcut, isn't it? They get the doctoral student to do the work for the university and linking impact together.
Oh, totally, because actually the external should have been able to see that.
Yeah.
The only thing the external should have been able to look at is to say, what is your contribution to knowledge?
Yeah. Hopefully this thing doesn't take hold. And if you're a professional researcher making choices about where you're going to study next, it's one of the things to start talking about. And also maybe talking to your own professional body about their own way of thinking of the world. Because the good thing about professional bodies is they're often quite weak themselves, and they depend on professional fees. So if people are kicking up a stink and saying this is detrimental to our professional practice, then vote with your pounds. And universities, get a grip.
Yes, I know it's hard out there, but don't lose the thread. You know, baby out with the bathwater type thing. Keep the vision and keep your integrity.
And on that note, see you next time.